I don't think ever before I have actually had to don Wellingtons and a Barber for the launch of a new car. But if ever I was going to do it, it really should be for this, the brand new Land Rover Defender. It's amazing to finally see it, I think is the best description of my emotions, because we've all been waiting a very long time. And it's fair to say Land Rover has had, well, a very difficult problem on their hands, because the Defender, the series Land Rover, it's an icon. How do you reinvent it for the 21st century? Well, this is how. 110 here, 90 here. Where to start? Let's start with some of the design details. We've got the circle in a square for the lights, that characteristic Defender thing. You see that all around the car, all these little sort of bits that you've picked up from the old one. The overall shape, that sort of very horizontal lines, the sort of the squared off edges, but then updated. Things like the wing mirrors here, square. I'll leave the overall impressions to you to decide, because styling is subjective, as we always say. But things that are going underneath it, a new D7X architecture. This is the stiffest body that Land Rover has ever produced. Air suspension is standard on the 110. We've got a passive setup on this as standard, but you can option air suspension on that. And I think one of the things that struck me reading through all the information about this car, one of the difficult things that Land Rover has had to do is appeal to a massively broad spectrum of people with this car. Because if you think about the old Defender, it was everything from a utility vehicle, and there will be commercial vehicles of this version coming later, to something that was very much a style icon going around cities that never saw mud. And I think if there's one thing that sort of shows how they've had to appeal to this broad range of people, it's the wheel options. So on the 90 here, we've got the smallest 18-inch wheels, steel wheels. And then on this up to 20, but you can option 22-inch wheels. Before we leave the front of the new Defender though, it's probably worth mentioning the engines. A plug-in hybrid drivetrain capable of driving on pure electric will be available in 2020. However, from launch, there will be 2 diesel and 2 petrol engines. The 4-cylinder twin-turbocharged diesel engines will have either 197 or 237 brake horsepower, and both provide 317 pounds-foot of torque. A fuel economy figure of 37.2 mpg applies to both, as does a CO2 figure of 199 grams per kilometre. The petrol engines are slightly more diverse. First up, there is a 296 brake horsepower turbocharged 4-cylinder capable of hitting 60 miles an hour in 7.7 seconds. Top of the range, however, is a mild hybrid powertrain, featuring a straight-six Ingenium petrol engine with a turbocharger and a 48-volt electric supercharger. There is also a belt-integrated starter motor in place of an alternator and a 48-volt lithium-ion battery to store energy captured during deceleration. The end result is 394 brake horsepower, 406 pounds-foot of torque, fuel consumption of 29.4 mpg and 0 to 60 miles an hour in 6.1 seconds. I'm going to focus on the 110 because that's the car that's coming first. Its price is going to be £45,200 basic. We haven't got prices for the 90 and commercial yet, but they're saying guide price probably starting at around about £40,000 when the 90 comes out, and commercial vehicle around about £35,000 plus VAT. Obviously, but we're going to stick with the 110 because that's the one that's coming first. So those are the numbers I'll talk about. Just going to mention as we go past here, we've got the raised air intake there, nicely sort of integrated into that A-pillar. Let's talk about wheelbase. Called the 110. The whole car is about just over 200 millimeters longer, and most of that is within the wheelbase. So they've kept those really nice short front and rear overhangs. So this is actually, it's a 119 technically, but other than that, all the numbers are pretty similar. It's a little bit wider, as you would expect, because this has obviously been done with side impact protection and all that sort of thing, and airbags, etc, etc, etc. Underneath the car, well, we've got double wishbones at the front and multi-link at the rear, or integrated link at the rear, I should say. Air suspension, you can see the full articulation here. And then walking around to the back, this particular spec, by the way, is Defender X. So that's sort of really quite top tier, hence all the black parts on it. Coming around the back, we've got these lovely Squircle lights, as apparently they're being called. So you can see the sort of the resemblance again. I really like the back. The back is my favourite part of the car in terms of the design. So I think it really pays tribute to the old car, but looks very modern. You've got these hips there as well. These little additional lights apparently so you can actually see past the rear wheel, which is obviously the spare wheel I should say, which is up here, not down under there, which then again helps the departure angle, which is actually better than the old Defender as well. So come around here, open up the, you will note, side hinged rear door, again paying tribute to the old car. God, that feels really heavy. One of the things they say about this is they've gone for durability, because that's what people I think associate with series and Defenders, hence there still being so many of them still around. Towing eyes on here, off these it's I think it support 9 tonnes going through the car at the back and 10 at the front and 6.5 snatch. You can tell I've done my research on this, can't you? Anyway, let's have a sit in here with the seats down. 2,380 litres of capacity in here. You can obviously fold all the seats flat. I asked the excellent people at ACH Classic, because they're experts in old Defenders and series Land Rovers, and you know, I wouldn't claim to be a complete expert, so I want to know what were they looking for. And I think one of the things they mentioned was ground clearance, so I checked on that and I wrote down all the numbers compared to an old Defender 110 and the new one down here, and pretty much across the board this is better. As I say, the approach angle not quite as good as the old one. We're still looking at 38 degrees though. Breakover angle pretty much identical. That ground clearance, obviously it's out to 291 millimeters. It was 250 before from what I found out, and of course you've got the air suspension so you can raise it, which helps as well. So off-road I think this is going to be just phenomenally capable, and much more so really than the old car. Looking down the list here, say we've got the weight has gone up by about, it's under 300 kilos, but then the old Defender wasn't actually as light as I thought it might be. That was already over 2 tons. So again, not bad. The side tilt, or transverse as it were, what it can cope with going across, up from 35 degrees to 45 degrees. I say all these things because they're not things that I normally look for in a car, but I think it's important if you're buying a Defender that you want to know that it can do all these things off-road. And then I come to wading depth. Now wading depth used to be 500 millimeters, now it is 900 millimeters. That's a huge leap, and you look at what others can cope with, and I think they say a Unimog can only cope with 1.2 meters. So this is extraordinarily capable off-road. You can also have all sorts of option packs. We'll get onto a few more of those when I sit in the front in a moment, but you can have things like a washer in the back, so you can wash your pets or your boots or your bike or whatever. And up on the roof as well, another thing, the old Defender only used to be rated up to 150 kilos on the roof, and that included a roof rack. Now it's 168 kilos moving, or dynamic as they call it, and up to 300 kilos on the roof static. So that means you can put a roof rack up there, and you can have the tent. You can actually get a ladder that comes down the back here, which you might have seen on some of the old Defenders. I always thought that was really cool, having a ladder down the back of your car. And you can have a tent up there, and you can sleep up there. 2 people can sleep up there, and you won't be over the weight limit. Door really is heavy. It's worth mentioning actually as we come down the side here that the body and white panels of this are not shared with any other Land Rover at all. And as we make full use of the wellies and step in here, just because I can, this panel here, standard on the 110, it's optional on the 90. Talking of which, we'll go over here, because there's something in the interior that I want to particularly show you. But it's worth mentioning on this has the SPF, or satin protective film, which is essentially a wrap, but it means that if you're off-roading, if you get scratched or sort of bumped, you can easily take this off and then put it back on again and preserve the beautiful look of your new Defender. So anyway, let's go and sit inside. There's so much to talk about in here as well as the outside. Where to start? Well, the thing I said I wanted to show you was here. Now there are 3 options for this sort of central portion here. You can have a walk-through option, so you can get through to the rear easy. It's probably more sort of the commercial things. Then you've got a fixed centre thing here, which is in fact in the 110, which you can see, which is a lovely piece of wood there, very architectural, very beautiful, probably for the people that are going to use it around town more. And then this, which is particularly personal for me because I remember going to school when I was 6 or 7, certainly still in short trousers, and I went in a county Defender, so the long wheelbase sort of 110 one, and it had this, the jump seat. And of course back then it was a manual gearbox with the 2 gear levers sort of, for putting into high and low ratio. Now we've got the automatic gearbox, so 8-speed ZF, proven, reliable, as they're keen to point out, but we still have jump seat, so you can sit in the middle there, which I think that's a really nice touch. I'm really glad that they've managed to keep that in this car. Of course, when it goes up there, you have the headrest in the way of the rear view mirror, so that, if you spec it, then there's a camera in the fin on the top, and that has the clear view rear sight, which means you get actually a much better view of what's going on out of the back. There's also this very clever system you might have seen before where we've got cameras, so you can actually see almost what's underneath the bonnet of the car as well through the camera, so it's easier to judge what you're doing off-road and all that. Actual driving position, they call this a command driving position, this sort of very high up, upright sort of thing, and yeah, actually feels quite like a Defender. Let's talk about some of the materials in here, because, well, they've done that thing of trying to bring the exterior of the car inside the car, because it was obviously a feature of the old Defender. So we've got this sort of the paint here, exposed bolts. Sometimes you see that in cars, and usually it's when I was thinking, oh, they've left it exposed here, it looks really cool, these hex bolts uncovered like that. Big feature is this, which is the magnesium alloy crossbeam, which goes all the way across here, and that is actually a structural part, and it's yeah, it's quite cool having that sort of thing in here. The overall experiences of something that's really quite simple, but then we've obviously got an awful lot of technology in here at the same time. So we've got this 10-inch screen here with new Pivi Pro, which is just their name for the latest version, which is meant to be simpler and easier to access things, because certainly my experience of previous JLR screens has been that you've had to go into too many menus sometimes to get to things. So now much more easily sort of configurable and just one touch, I suppose. Obviously digital display there as well. Also fully 5G ready for SOTA, which is software over the air. So there are 14 different modules throughout the car, and it's continually sort of, you can be updated without having to go to a dealer, basically. Even if you were, say, in the middle of Sahara, how cool would this look in sort of Camel Trophy, we're probably not allowed to say cigarette names, but anyway, Camel Trophy livery in the middle of a desert, you can imagine it now. And it can update via even satellite phone, which I think that's pretty cool. And again, just speaks to the fact that they want this car to be reliable, updatable, so yeah, they want this to go on adventures. Other things in the interior, people have mentioned a hose down interior in the past, because obviously that's what everyone does every single day. This isn't hose down, but it's fully sort of rubberized in the floor, so you can mop it down, brush it out effectively. It's hard wearing, which I suppose is what people want. And if I was buying one of these, living one of these and chucking mountain bikes and stuff in it every day, yes, I would want to be able to kind of keep it vaguely clean and sluice the mud out, I suppose. Materials in here, we've also got some leather. We've also got these patches on the side of the seats, which are, again, hard wearing and durable. The driving experience, well, obviously it's not something I can really comment on yet because I haven't driven it. These are static cars. Off-road is one thing, on-road is clearly where you're going to expect the car to have made the biggest leaps. They said in the past it was, they described it as being fun with flaws, which I think is fairly sort of, yeah, it's a nice description, in the same way that sort of, now you don't have to bash your knuckles on the screen here because you've actually got a bit of elbow room in this. This, they're saying, is still fun, but without the flaws. Whether it is or not, we'll have to wait and see. That time, hopefully, will come relatively soon. For now, what else have I forgotten? There's so much to talk about, isn't there? Oh, Alpine lights up there. Yeah, they've come back. New Defender. Success? Let us know. This is, of course, just one of the cars being unveiled at this year's Frankfurt Motor Show, so please go and check out all the other films from the show. This, incidentally, is the optional fabric roof, only available on 90. You get the panoramic one on the 110 if you want. Gives you the full safari feel if you want. Woo! Woodpecker.